Hey guys, hope you're having a wonderful day. In today's lecture, I'm going to be focusing on desert biomes. So as you can see in this this backdrop I have, this picture, starting off with this slide, we have this desert-looking biome. And when I first created this actual lecture, I didn't realize that this was like a video game rendering. So if you know what video game this is actually from, please let me know in the comments below. It's amazing how advanced video games have actually become now. The one dead giveaway after looking at it is this giant planet in the back, and there's also these really unique, almost like spaceship looking trails in the atmosphere. So but hey, it's pretty cool, huh? Now, as we progress through Unit 4, you should be very familiar with this graph now. Even just 3 lectures in, we looked at tropical rainforests in the first lecture of Unit 4. Then in the second lecture of Unit 4, we looked at tundra and boreal forests. So we got 2 in 1. Today we are focusing on these desert landscapes. And like I already talked about, desert biomes vary in temperature. What makes a desert isn't its temperature, but it is the precipitation that those biomes receive. So in this lecture, be prepared to look at organisms' adaptations to living in these really dry places. Many times these deserts, many deserts that we're going to focus on are going to be rather hot, so there are adaptations to allow animals to remain cool. And also there's going to be several videos throughout this lecture that we can't watch together because that's like copyright infringement. So make sure to click those links of those videos linked in the description below. One thing we need to understand, and all these terms are going to be red terms, are the 4 ways an organism exchanges heat. So through conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation are all mechanisms, all ways organisms exchange heat. Now, what does that mean, exchanging heat? Well, it means that, your body is either going to get warmer through that exchange, or you're going to, release heat and your body is going to get cooler. So really quickly, if you're obviously watching this video, find a cool surface and put your hand on that surface. So my hand's on the desk and my hand feels colder. Now what is actually happening is there's an exchange of heat. Heat from my hand is going into the table. So when there is an exchange of heat in this direction, your hand feels cold. So heat is leaving my hand and going into the table. Now if this table, for whatever reason, was hotter than my hand, the transfer of heat would move into my hand would feel hotter. So what I'm describing is actually conduction, physical to physical contact of exchanging heat. So that is the first one, conduction. Now convection is the movement of a fluid, and remember that air that we breathe is a fluid, not just liquids are not the only fluids, right? Gases mixed together are also fluids. And if a fluid is warmer than your body, right, that moving fluid will actually transfer heat into your body. And this is how convection ovens function. So Thanksgiving's coming up, my favorite holiday, by the way. And if you have a convection oven, and there's different types of oven, but convection ovens, they take air, they heat up that air to a certain temperature, and then they push that air through fans over your turkey, and your turkey cooks through convection. A heated fluid is passed over the turkey, and the turkey cooks, right? So similarly, if, if the fluid is cooler, then convection is going to cool you, right? But usually when you get a breeze, evaporation is at play as well, especially obviously when you're sweating. Radiation is the actual electromagnetic spectrum from the sun. These, the actual frequencies from the sun are actually vibrating, and when those frequencies reach you, they actually heat up that surface. So that is radiation. Direct radiation from the sun causes you to heat up. Next, we have evaporation. So evaporation is this amazing thing that evolution has kind of harnessed in mammals, in humans especially, through sweat. So dogs too, they utilize evaporation. Now dogs, they don't really have sweat glands on their body like we do. We have sweat pores all over our body. So when we're working out, we sweat. That sweat evaporates, and as that liquid water on our skin evaporates, it pulls heat energy away with it. So that is another way of heat transfer. Now dogs, and we're going to get into each one of these a little bit more, but dogs, what do? They pant, right? They stick out their tongue, and the large surface area of their tongue has obviously a lot of saliva. That saliva is going to evaporate, and they are going to exchange a lot of heat through their tongue. So conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. So I really like this picture. Many ectotherms, and remember, ectotherms, they don't create their own heat energy from the inside like endotherms do. Ectotherms, their body temperature actually kind of matches their external environment, but they can do certain things to decrease their body temperature and increase their body temperature. Now, in desert ecosystems, in hot desert ecosystems, you're going to have a lot of lizards, a lot of reptiles, and deserts actually get really cold at night. So their bodies are really frigid in the early morning. And you can tell if you ever go out in the field, if you ever get an ecological job and you have to go out in the early morning and you find reptiles, they are lethargic. They are really, really slow moving. If you think you're slow moving in the morning, think again. Lizards and other reptiles, they can hardly move. And what they do is they find a dark, well, preferably a dark, rocky surface, because we know dark surfaces, they have low albedo, so dark surfaces absorb heat really well. They lay on a dark surface and they heat up through conduction by actually touching their body on that dark surface. They heat up through radiation, and after the morning sun heats up that rock and heats up their body, and the fluid of air around them heats up, they also increase their body temperature through convection. They can finally get their metabolism moving up to speed, and they can actually start moving a lot faster. So I'm going to go through all of these. Now, there are different adaptations to aid in thermal regulation, so not just behavioral like I mentioned. And these include insulation, circulatory adaptations, cooling by evaporative heat loss, and behavioral responses that I kind of already went over, jumped the gun a little bit. So insulation. Organisms that are endothermic are always going to have some insulative structures. For example, birds, they have feathers. And interestingly enough, feathers first evolved not for flight, but for insulative purposes, right? The first feathers that come onto Earth's scene are actually not functional for flight at all. They solely kept heat in that animal, right? So skin, feathers, blubber, and hair reduce the heat flow between endothermic bodies and their environment. Now, it makes sense why marine mammals, they don't have any hair, because when hair is wet, its insulative properties really vanish. Now, the main reason why hair works really good in terrestrial ecosystems is because hair actually traps air. And air is an excellent insulator. That's why windows in modern day homes are double paned, right? So you have that space of air in between the two windows, because air is literally all around us, super cheap, right? You don't have to, add, any money resources to getting air in between your windows. And it's an excellent insulator. So hair actually traps air. And we're going to learn about the polar bear. Wow, missed opportunity to talk about the polar bear last lecture, but we'll get to that later. So it makes sense why blubber is the adaptation in marine mammals, because hair isn't that functional when it's wet. When it's wet, it doesn't trap air and it doesn't really have insulative properties. So blubber, this layer of fat, is selected for in aquatic environments. So all these insulative structures, they allow these organisms to hold on to heat and become more efficient, right? They waste energy less because they're insulating and kind of slowing down the loss of heat through their bodies. So circulatory adaptations, these two are red terms. So we have these circulatory adaptations. So basically, blood flowing away from the heart, just a little bit of information. Oxygen-rich blood flowing away from the heart are called the arteries, and arteries branch off into tiny little arterioles, and then the tiniest of all vessels in our bodies are called capillaries. There are some capillaries that are so small that one red blood cell fits through at a time. So red blood cells have to literally single file move through some of the smallest capillaries. And there are these capillary beds throughout our entire body. This is why no matter where you cut yourself, you will bleed, because there are capillary beds throughout your body. Why? Because tissues require oxygen and blood carries oxygen, and then these cells within your body, they carry out their metabolic function and waste products accumulate. So waste must be shuffled via the blood and the vascularity, the vascular system to other organs to get processed and such. So all in all, we have these capillary beds throughout our bodies, and you might notice that if you run a lot, right, if you're really working out hard, your face, you start to blush, right? You get red, really red, and that is because vasodilation is occurring. So vasodilation, there are these little sphincter muscles on the entrance to these capillary beds, and those muscles can either contract or relax. So vasodilation is the relaxation of this sphincter muscle, and when this sphincter muscle relaxes, more blood moves to the surface, right? So the reason why you get all flush and all red is because there's more blood reaching the surface parts of your skin. Now, what does this do? This allows heat to escape your body, right? Oppositely, if you are freezing cold, right? Because I have students always ask me, like, well, how come in the winter when I come inside, my cheeks are red? Like, why is it my body vasoconstricting? And that's because you are actually over-prepared. You have a nice, expensive winter coat on, you have a hat on, and your body's actually, your head is actually a little too warm, so your body's trying to kind of, interact with that. However, if you are absolutely freezing, like you're unprepared, you fell in water on a hike and are turning, into the hypothermic state, your body you're going to be white. You're almost going to be blue because these sphincter muscles are going to constrict. Vasoconstriction is going to occur. There's going to be very little blood going through your capillary beds because your body does not want to lose heat. So vasodilation versus vasoconstriction. The more blood that reaches your surface, the more heat can escape, right? So here's a cross section of one of these sphincter muscles around a capillary right here. So really cool. And the marine iguanas in the Galapagos Island, they too do this. So marine iguanas from the Galapagos, they eat, most of their diet is this green algae that they feed on underwater. So they actually dive underwater. And they can dive for a decent amount of time. And the largest males can actually feed the longest, which does make a lot of sense because they have the largest lung capacity, so they can store more oxygen than smaller individuals. But they do the same thing. So another thing that's really important about this whole idea is that the ocean that the Galapagos is in, even though it's on the equator, the ocean is actually very cold. So the Pacific Ocean in that part of the world is actually really cold. And these iguanas, they can't, they're limited not so much by the oxygen they could hold, but their thermal capacity. Because you guys know these are ectothermic organisms. And it would be, deadly if their metabolism slowed down underwater and they couldn't swim anymore, right? Because ectotherms rely on their external environment for their temperature. So what do these iguanas do? Well, they bask in the sun. Before they can go feeding, they bask in the sun and they vasodilate. So I was talking about mammals and us vasodilating to dump heat, right? But additionally, ectotherms vasodilate so they could acquire heat. So heat can hit their skin, and that because the capillaries are so close, they can warm up their bodies, right? And then they can quickly get up their body temperature and then go dive underwater. So when they finally do dive underwater, they constrict their capillary beds. They carry out vasoconstriction so that warm blood stays away from the cool waters of the Pacific, and they could dive and feed longer, right? So I really like those ideas. These are circulatory adaptations. Evaporative heat loss, I already mentioned these, right? Sweating and the evaporation of sweat and dogs panting takes away copious amounts of heat. Now, behavioral responses. Now, there are many organisms, especially in arid and hot ecosystems, that are just nocturnal. They cannot, they evolutionarily, it's too stressful during the day, so they become active only at night. And those are nocturnal organisms, right? Now, there are other organisms that are diurnal, active during the day, nocturnal, active at night, and then crepuscular, active at dawn and or dusk, right? So crepuscular. And so these are just like lifestyles of activity. And then we have other behavioral responses such as burrowing, right? So if it's too hot in the desert, organisms are going to burrow just a few, 5 centimeters down. Those burrows are significantly cooler than the conditions on the sandy surface. Finding shade, huddling together, shivering, right? So when you shiver, you're actually, the friction of your body inside is actually warming up, causing you to heat up a little more. And then there is torpor as well as hibernation. So hibernation, we know many bears, through the harshest month, they are going to hibernate. Many mammals do hibernate and slow down through the harshest of the months. Usually hibernation has to do with cool weather. Now torpor is like hibernation, but it's on a shorter time scale. So we have these different hummingbirds here on the left. Now, interesting about hummingbirds have the highest metabolism of any animal on the planet. So we know that mammals have a really high metabolism. We're endothermic, we're really active. However, birds have an even higher metabolism. And when you actually look at all the bird species, hummingbirds have the highest of all the birds when it comes to metabolism. They are super tiny. Their wings, you guys know their wings beat just at an incredible rate. And they beat, really interestingly, they actually can, hummingbirds can actually hover in one spot because their wings can beat super fast in like a figure 8 motion. So they have the highest metabolism of any animal on the planet. Their metabolism is so high that they cannot just go to sleep like other organisms at night. They have to actually enter torpor. Now, torpor is, again, like hibernation. Some organisms do go into torpor when conditions are really tough. There's also something called estivation, which is usually coincides with really, really hot temperatures. But hummingbirds have to enter torpor every night because their metabolism is so high that they would actually starve to death by the morning. So by entering torpor, their metabolism slows and they breathe much less than they would during the day. And this reserves energy. And then when they wake up, they exit torpor, their bodies warm up, right? And then they can go about their day. So really interesting kind of responses to their environment here. Here is a video that highlights how some of the hottest deserts on the planet, how organisms like the kangaroos, how they actually live in these places. And this video is really cool. It highlights many behavioral responses. So as you can see here, they are licking their actual forearms. And this is obviously causing evaporative heat loss. And kangaroos, they are so cool. But I really like this video. Watch it. I believe it is narrated by David Attenborough, who is, just a legend in the field of zoology. So definitely watch this video. Learn about kangaroos. It's a quick video. It's really cool. Now, this is another recurring theme, especially in this unit, is the surface to volume ratio. So the interplay between thermal regulation and surface to volume ratio has driven species adaptations for millions of years, right? We've learned so much about surface to volume ratio, even by looking at the boreal and tundra biomes. You can totally tell that you can look at an organism and basically predict where that organism, what kind of biome that organism is going to be living at. So remember, these two shapes have the same exact volume. There's 8 cubes, but the shape actually changes the surface, right? So this object on the left has a higher surface to volume ratio, right? There is more surface on this object than there is on this object. So these organisms are going to, pretend these are organisms, obviously. These organisms are going to be able to, dump heat more efficiently. And these organisms are going to be able to hold on to heat more efficiently. So these are concepts that, I want to drill home. With all of these previous slides in mind, I want us to look at, these biomes, and we have to realize that smaller animals are going to have higher surface to volume ratios, right? That's it. The smaller an organism is, the larger their surface is compared to their volume. So they interact with their thermal environment more than larger animals do. So because they have a larger surface to volume ratio, they can dump more heat into their environment. So we do see this trend. We do see a lot of smaller animals living in these really hot and arid places. Larger animals can hold on to eat more efficiently because they have smaller surface to volume ratios. So that, again, remember, we talked about Bergmann's rule. That has to do with that, right? Obviously, larger animals, they have more thermal inertia, right? So relative to their body size, smaller animals, especially small endotherms, require much more energy than larger ones. So because smaller animals have such a smaller surface to volume ratio, heat is easily and readily escaping. So they have to maintain, they have to have actually higher metabolism, and they require more energy, which leads us to these figures. So here, and it's really important, before you actually start to uncover what the figure is actually depicting, we need to look at the actual axes and what the axes are. So BMR, so already I can tell that this is liters of oxygen an hour. So this is basically a form of metabolism. So how much oxygen you're taking, the volume of oxygen your body requires, is a great indicator of metabolism. As you start to run, you breathe heavier because your cells need more oxygen to carry out work to create ATP to allow muscle contractions. So as you run, metabolism goes up. The liters of oxygen per hour is going to go up, right? But remember, this is on a log scale, right? So we have, the metabolism as a function of body mass, and this is a log scale. So this is hard to depict because both of these are log. So what is this figure actually saying? Well, body mass is log over here, but this is not a log scale, and this is per kilogram. So these are very similar figures. They look completely different, but this is the main figure I want you to look at. So this is liters of oxygen per kilogram. And per kilogram, the smallest of the mammals has the highest metabolism, right? So per kilogram, you have the highest levels of oxygen. Rocko wants to come up here. All right. So Rocko is down here. He is like a small to medium-sized mammal, and he has a much lower metabolic rate per kilogram than a tiny shrew. So this makes a ton of sense because the smaller you are, the larger your surface area is. Your surface to volume ratio is much higher, so heat is escaping you, and you have to eat more, and you need to, your heart is going to beat at a really fast rate, and you're going to have just overall much higher metabolism. And I just want to do a quick review on Bergmann's rule, which we learned last lecture. Populations and species of larger size are found in colder environments, and species of smaller size are found in warmer environments. So you can see here, further away from the equator is colder environments, and you have larger bear species. Allen's rule, again, Allen's. So Bergmann's, think the bee and the body size. Allen's, look at these this double L and look at bunny ears, right? So again, both of these rules are ecogeographical rules. And this Allen's rule states that animals adapted to colder climates are going to have shorter limbs and body appendages than animals adapted to warmer climates. So oppositely, animals that are living in warmer climates are going to have larger body appendages to dump more and more heat. And yeah, they're going to have larger surface to volume ratios compared to their counterparts that live in cooler climates. So besides animals, plants have so many adaptations, right? And this is really important to me because everybody talks about animals so much, and I think it's really important for us not to be so plant blind. So plants have amazing adaptations that regulate their temperature too. Now, what you might not know is that there are there's actually more than 3. There's actually a few more that have been discovered. But there are actual different mechanisms of photosynthesis. So there are C3 plants and there are C4 plants, and the C4 and C3 relates to the carbon molecule that enters the actual photosynthetic reaction. So separate mechanisms have evolved throughout the plant kingdom, and basically different plants photosynthesize differently. Now, in arid and in more arid climates, C4 plants do much better, right? So this figure shows net photosynthetic CO2. So net photosynthetic CO2, so how much CO2 the plants are taking in as a function of leaf temperature, right? And you have C4 plants are doing better at warmer temperatures, so we can predict that we will find C4 plants in these hotter biomes compared to C3 plants. Now, we're going to learn about plant adaptations that help regulate temperature. This figure, it's not so much about C4 versus C3 plants, but it's, I wanted for us to all realize that plants, like animals, have thermal optimums, right? At specific temperatures for each and every plant species, there is a temperature in which the organism photosynthesizes the most, right? So this at, around 40, 41, 42 degrees Celsius, this species, Amaranthus palmari, photosynthesizes the most efficiently. Contrary, you have this C3 plant has its temperature optimum at 23 degrees Celsius. So there are all these leaf adaptations that we see in different biomes. In biomes that are really light limited, you are going to see some solar tracking leaves. So leaves that actually follow the sun throughout the day. Now, in desert, in hot and arid desert biomes, you see vertical east to west leaves. So the plant behind me is actually a desert adapted plant. It's called a snake plant, and you can see that its leaves are straight up. Because of this, during the most intense sunlight time of the day, which is 12, when the sun is right above, it actually receives the lowest amount of light throughout the entire day. Obviously, besides when the sun just isn't there. So this is an adaptation you see throughout these biomes, is that in desert biomes, you have leaves that stick straight up, because at 12, that sun is so intense, and if the leaf was horizontal, right, the leaf would heat up so much, proteins would denature, and the plant would die. So by having leaves that are straight up, that is a great adaptation to reduce the amount of heat these plants receive. So oppositely, a horizontal leaf is going to be the hottest, and it's going to receive the most radiation. So this is actually radiation from the sun. There is a specific region of radiation that plants utilize from the sun, and this is that frequency, 400 to 700 nanometers. So horizontal leaves, they receive the most radiation at 12, right? Vertical oriented leaves receive the lowest radiation at 12. So just the leaf shape changes the amount of radiation and as well the amount of heat. Now these are other plant adaptations that allow plants to conserve water and maintain temperature. Remember, deserts are solely dependent on the water those biomes get. So water is definitely a limiting factor in these biomes. Now, reflective leaves are an adaptation in desert biomes. So I actually have some other plants that have reflective leaves around here. I don't want to wake up Rocko though. But basically a plant will adapt and evolve over millions of years. If it's in a really arid and hot place, there are reflective surfaces that allow light to hit the plant but then bounce off. So when you get that bouncing, you get less incoming radiation and the structure of that plant heats up less. So reflective waxes or trichomes, tiny hairs that are really shiny on plants, they are going to reflect light so that light doesn't bombard the plant. So these surfaces, they actually increase the plant's albedo, which is contrary to what you might think. You think that plants around the world are just going to want to absorb all the sunlight, but in these biomes, there's not enough water to support and cool down. And basically, we're going to get to that in a little bit, but these plants, they don't actually want to absorb all that incoming solar radiation. Like I mentioned, reducing the leaf area or leaf angle, so leaves that are oriented straight up are going to receive less sunlight during the most demanding parts of the day. As well as some plants just reduce their leaf area. And an extreme example of that is cactus. So cacti, they have evolutionarily, they have lost their true leaf structures, and instead the actual column is their photosynthetic surface. So they have greatly reduced their leaf surface area to live in these demanding habitats. Now, the picture on the right is the next bullet, which is deep roots, or a large root to shoot ratio. So many desert adapted plants have much more root surface area compared to their shoot area, right? So a large root to shoot ratio. Obviously, these roots are going to try and find water in these demanding habitats. Not only do they try and find water, but they also store water. So there's a lot more than that meets the eye when it comes to desert plants. Most of their structures are actually underneath the soil's surface. Like I just mentioned, you have water storage organs, not only in roots, but in the actual above ground tissue. And there is a video coming up about the saguaro cactus. And there is a time lapse of a saguaro cactus. Overnight it rains and the mass of the saguaro cactus increases just tremendously. So check that video out, that's coming up. There are also drought deciduous leaves. So here in Western New York, we have deciduous trees that drop their leaves before the incoming onslaught of winter. A main reason for this is because if they didn't drop their leaves, snow would accumulate, and that snow would cause major branches to collapse, and the tree would be more susceptible to diseases and such. Now, this happened, if you guys live here and have lived here your whole life, hopefully I'm not so old. Do you guys remember the October storm? Please make me not feel really old, but we had this really early winter storm in October, and leaves were still on the trees, and many trees, huge limbs went down, full trees went down. There were power outages everywhere. It was like a national disaster, I'm pretty sure. So, New York, Western New York needed to get help from other states and such. And that's because, we had an earlier winter storm in October. But here in desert adapted plants, when it gets really dry, they lose their leaves. So they actually drop their leaves when it becomes very dry. Now, plants are continuously supplying their leaves with water. Water escapes the leaves, and then carbon dioxide takes that space that the water was taking up. So through this, and this process is called evapotranspiration, you get the actual heat leaves the plant, which is good, but remember, these places are water limited. So in order to continue living through the driest parts of the year, many trees can adapt and lose their leaves during these really dry periods. And other plants, they just skip the entirety of the harsh parts of the season and have an annual life cycle and just carry out their life cycle in just a few weeks. So as soon as it rains, there are these seeds, they germinate, they flower, they get pollinated, they produce more seeds, and then they die. So they avoid all of the, that's a great adaptation too, you don't have to withstand all the negative, characteristics of these extremely arid places if you can just carry out your life cycle really fast and efficiently. So this is an acacia species that is drought deciduous, so it's not dead. This is just a part of the driest part of the year, so it has no more leaves. This link I will put, this will be link number 2. This is that Sonoran, in the Sonoran Desert. There are saguaro cactus, and these are just such cool organisms. Now, over evolutionary times, there are no leaves, and this is actually the photosynthetic structure. So this minimizes their surface area for photosynthesis, so water is better maintained in these smaller surface areas. So next, we'll look at this figure, and you can see, looking at the graph, throughout the entire year, right? Throughout the entire year, evaporation exceeds precipitation, right? So this is super demanding. I mean, you need incredible adaptations to persist throughout the year here, right? Now on to the formation of deserts. Deserts are formed by weathering processes as large variations in temperatures between day and night put strains on the rocks, which consequently break into pieces. This is another theme of deserts, of not only are many of them not only are many of them hot, but even the hottest deserts on the planet, they get frigid at night, right? Remember, there is a term, specific heat. What substance has a very high specific heat? Water. So areas that have large amounts of water are going to be their temperature is going to be relatively maintained throughout. But when there's no water, there's nothing to hold on to that heat. So these really hot biomes, they then cool down when the sun sets and they get really frigid. So this drastic change in temperature actually makes the bedrock more frigid, which is why so many deserts, when you think of a desert, you think of sand. And this is because this drastic temperature change actually breaks up bedrock, right? And you get these, millions of billions and probably trillions of pieces of rock fragments in the form of sand. So their diurnal range, their daytime range, might be as 20 to 30 degrees Celsius, and the rock surface experiences even greater differentials. So the range, right? This isn't just the temperature. Like, their range during the day, temperatures range from 10 degrees Celsius, but during the night, you get drastic cooling, right? This next slide shows all of the 10 largest deserts on the planet. You have the Antarctic desert, which is just absolutely massive, over 5 million square miles. The Arctic desert is again over 5 million square miles. The Sahara desert, the largest non-polar desert, 3,500,000 square miles, right? Absolutely massive. So huge deserts. The Arabian Desert in the Middle East, the Gobi Desert that we learned about, which is caused by a rain shadow effect because of the Himalayas, the Patagonian Desert, the Kalahari Desert in the south of Africa, and these are the biggest deserts on the planet. So you'll notice they're not all just arid. Well, they're all arid, but they're not. There are some polar deserts as well. And again, tying this figure into this lecture, the seasonality, the tilt of the earth, and how the tilt of the earth changes, causing seasons to change. The dark blue is going to be really rainy conditions. And you can see that the white is extremely arid conditions. So I love looking at this figure. I also like looking at the Midwest here, which is, it shifts from arid to rainy. And this is why you get like many grasslands throughout the Midwest here. And that coincides with this, this like light green color over here. So I love looking at, I just like checking out the precipitation and the seasonality of our planet. Now on to other desert animals. The kangaroo rat and other small mammals, they actually do not have to drink water, which sounds absolutely crazy. But they have evolved this really unique adaptation. They attain water indirectly from the food that they eat. So water and carbon dioxide are metabolic end products of the oxidation of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates from the seeds they eat. So they eat these dry seeds, and through this metabolic process, the end reaction, the last reaction of this chemical manipulation is actually produces water, right? So they don't drink water, they produce it as a byproduct, which I think is so cool. Camels are insanely cool. I love camels. Most people, they think that like the humps of a camel is actually just bags of water, which is not the case. Those humps are actually fat reserves. Though it does yield more than 1 gram of water for every gram of fat processed. So they can process that fat and actually extract water through that as they're getting energy, because fat, we know, is a great energy reserve. They can drink 200 liters, which is 53 gallons of water in just 3 minutes. So when there is water, they can rapidly drink it. Upon exhalation, you guys know that when it gets cold out, when you breathe out, you see this cloud, and that is moisture from your lungs. So that amount of moisture is released in every breath. It's only in the winter that you can actually see all that moisture leaving. So this happens in every animal that breathes. However, the camels have a specific adaptation that traps most of this water in their nostrils, so that water does not leave their body and it is reabsorbed. So that's a great way to conserve water. Their mouths, if you guys haven't seen a camel's mouth, it is something out of a sci-fi movie. They have a thick, leathery lining that allows them to chew thorny desert plants that, you guessed it, have water inside them. So I'll show you a picture next. Their mouths are really freaky looking. Additionally, they have a transparent third eyelid when they're facing sandstorms. So they actually have a protective, transparent eyelid. Really, really cool. 2 different camel species. The double, I forget what it's called. I'll put a note on the bottom here. It's like, it starts with a B. Batrachium camels. They are more rare and they have the double humps. But look at that weird, almost thorny, leathery mouth that allows them to eat literal cactus. Like really stinging and thorning bushes and stuff. They can just munch on it. They have this protective mouth. Really crazy looking. Man, who would have thought their teeth are this crazy looking? Do not get bit by a camel. Reptiles are going to be abundant in hot deserts. They're ectotherms, right? Contrary to tundra and boreal systems, you don't see almost any reptiles. So they are, they are thermally limited to more of these hot environments. However, there are exceptions. So you might think, and because of the dry habitats of these deserts, there's one group of organisms that you just really don't see, and those are amphibians. Right? Amphibians, they actually breathe through their skin, and for that cutaneous respiration to actually supply their body with oxygen, their skin must stay wet. So there are no amphibians, except there are really cool exceptions. So this amphibian, it actually estivates, which is something I talked about in the beginning. And during the hot, dry months, it enters this kind of hibernation, but estivation has more to do with warm temperatures. So they're estivating in these deep burrows, and their skin actually sheds a number of times. And they don't just like move their skin off of them. They actually live in a cocoon made out of their shedded skin. And this is a waterproof cocoon, and that retains their moisture, which is crazy. Then, as we know, rains do occur, and they emerge from their burrows. They quickly find mates. They find the deepest puddle they can to, lay eggs and fertilize egg with sperm. You get tadpoles. You get a rapid development of these frogs, and then before that dryness comes back, you get the burrowing and that shedding of the skin yet again. Really, really cool adaptations to live in these demanding ecosystems. Now, desertification is the basic transition of different biomes into deserts is actually occurring more and more and more. So unfortunately, we have less and less tropical rainforests and more deserts, desert area showing up. Now, yes, I love biomes and I love diversity, and I think desert biomes are really important. But desertification is something that is not good during this time. So because they aren't forming naturally, they are forming because of human interactions. So the cultivation of semi-arid region encourages erosion of soil and is one of the main increases in desertification. So you can see here in 1973, this is Lake Chad, and you could see that because of semi-arid regions around Lake Chad, so people utilize this area for farming, right? So they're taking water from Lake Chad and they're irrigating, their fields in these semi-arid regions, right? So these semi-arid regions, they don't support a lot of agriculture without the absolute, removal of water resources. So with this, it's really an interesting idea, and it's confusing because yes, you want to feed people, but do you want to absolutely change the biome and cause more and more deserts? So deserts are becoming, are going to have larger surface areas. The Lake Chad has shrunk by 94% since the 1960s. So really interesting socioeconomic and, ecological ideas right here. Desertification. So something to definitely think about. The overview of this lecture, hopefully you guys liked it. Deserts are important ecosystems that are teeming with life. And evolution has shaped different adaptations to allow species to exist in these demanding habitats. I have yet to actually experience a true desert biome, so that is on my bucket list. I don't think I'm going to be traveling outside of the U.S. for a long time. I'm not going to be traveling anywhere for a while, but when I do feel comfortable traveling, I'm definitely going to explore my country. I need to go to Arizona and see some of these deserts for myself. Again, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you guys are happy and healthy. Thank you for your attention, and I will catch you later. Thanks, guys.